Okay, so up to this point we have covered while loops and do while loops. And we know that a while loop has a pretest, so it checks at the beginning, where a do while loop checks at the end, so it's going to happen at least once. Those are what are called conditional loops. There's some kind of a condition that basically allows you to get into the loop and basically get out of the loop. The next looping is called the for loop. Now the for loop is different. It's what is called a count controlled loop. Basically, we know how many times we need to execute this loop. Whether it's the number of students or the number of items or whatever the case may be, we basically know the number of times we're going to execute this loop. So let me go ahead and bring up the program. So we're going to bring up squares, and I do not have squares. Oh, okay. We just kind of show it here in the book. So here we have the book, and here we have the squares loop. Now, you notice it's a public void main. We've got an integer called number. We go ahead and say number is a number squared, and we basically print a dotted line. And so here's where a for loop is different. I basically have three parts to the for. The first one is setting the variable to some value. So in this case, I'm saying this int number up here, I'm setting it to 1. So we're going to start at 1. Then think of this next one as our condition. While, think of the word while number is less than or equal to 10. So we're going to keep looping through this while this statement is true. Then at the end of each loop, increment it by this amount here. So I'm going to add 1 to number at the end of every loop. So the first time in, I print number. Now it's starting at 1. So right here, number will be 1. So that's what we'll print. While it's less than or equal to 10, I go ahead and say number times number. Okay. Now, at the end of this loop, so 1 times 1 is going to be 1, obviously. And at the end of this loop, when it hits this brace right here, it's going to increment the number by 1. So it's now going to be a 2. So next time we come in here, that's going to say 2. And then it's going to print 2 times 2. We increment it by 1, 3, 3 times 3, 4, 4 times 4. Now, since I have less than or equal to 10, it will do a 10. And then it will increment at the end of this brace to 11. It comes back up, and again, it's going to check this right here to make sure that this statement is true. If number is equal to 11, it's going to drop out of that loop and basically be done. So this is basically what the output's going to look like. 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 9, so on and so forth. Okay. So for loop. We got a variable, we set it to 1. We've got a number, we take that variable and we're going to set some type of a while statement. Do this while this statement is true. And then we have an incrementer that increments that value at the end of the loop. So not too bad, pretty straightforward stuff. One thing I do want to point out, this is on page 215, and this is right here. So here I have my for loop, and it says x equals 1. So that's what we're starting at. That's the very first value we're going to have the first time through the loop. And then x, while x is less than or equal to 10, okay, that's kind of our way to get out. And we're going to increment it by 1. And I've got system.out print line x. It's going to print 1. But notice I've got x plus plus. So I'm actually incrementing it twice because it's going to increment that to a 2 here. Then when it hits this brace, that one will take into place and it's going to be a 3. So when this gets done, it's going to be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then it's going to basically get out. So now if we take a look at this one here, we've got a for loop, and I'm setting my value to 2. While number is less than or equal to 100, I'm going to increment by 2. So in this case, it's going to print 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all the way up through 100. And then this one says number equals 10, so we're starting at 10. And then while the number is greater than or equal to 0, that's kind of different, our incrementer is subtracting 1. So we're starting at 10, then 9, then 8, until we get to negative 1. Once we get to negative 1, we will drop out of that loop. So I can count by 2s, I can count by 3s, I can count by how many, I can increment by anything that we need to increment by. So let's take a look at user squares. And so here it says this program demonstrates a user-controlled for loop. So we've got a couple of integers, number and max value. I will display a table of numbers and their squares. Again, we're using the scanner import, so that's how we're going to get our values. So how high should I go? So we set a max value by typing in a number, and then I basically print out number squared. So this is kind of my table headings, and then I've got a line, and then I've got my for loop. So for, it says number equals 1, so that's the number we're starting with. The next one is, this is our while. Do this while this is true, and then increment by 1 basically, so number plus plus. And so we're going to print out number and then number times number. So again, this is our user squares, so that's the same thing we just looked at. Yeah, in the book it says squares. Okay, well, let's run it real quick. And well, except this time we're looking for, so yeah, so it's just like the one in the book we just did, except this time now, how high do you want to go? Well, let's go to 50. So now if we look at it, we can kind of see here's all the numbers squared 1 through 50. So 50 squared is 2,500. So not too bad there. Now let's take a look at the speed converter, kind of a big old program there on 219. And so basically what we're doing here is we've got 3 constants. We've got starting, max kph, and increment. So we're starting our kph, or kilometers per hour, at 60, and our max kilometers per hour is 130, and we're going to increment by 10. I've got 2 variables, kph and mph. I go ahead and print out kph and mph, and then a line. Then I say for while kph is equal to the starting kph, do this while kph is less than or equal to the max kph. And then we got kph plus equal increments. So it's going to add 10 to it each time. So mph is equal to kph times 0.6214. And then we go ahead and print out the 2 different values. So again, we're starting at a certain number. We're going to do this while this statement is true, and we're going to increment by this. So if we were to run this, so We see 60 is 37.3 miles per hour, 70 kilometers per hour is 43.5, 130 is 80.8. So, not too bad. So for next, 3 parts. First one says this is what we're starting at. The second one says do this loop while that's true. The third one says increment at the end of each loop by this amount. Okay, so let's kind of end this here, and then we're going to continue on with some running totals using loops and sentinel values.